Um, oh, okay. Um, so uh, I said earlier, oh, you're laughing. That's so funny. You're muted too, by the way.
That would be why. Okay, I was trying to give an intro for the recording part where it's like,
Oh,
okay, yes, this is Jennifer Garrison. She's giving a short presentation. We're gonna have questions afterwards. So this is a meeting about reproductive aging. This is all just for the recording part of it. All right, then. Sorry, go ahead, continue.
that's fine. And it meant to be less of a presentation and more of a discussion.
Yeah.
So I'm just continuing through how I think about reproductive aging. Um, And when at the beginning of this call, Aaron said he thinks about ending menopause as one avenue towards understanding aging and the rest of
Well,
the body.
I mean, ending in a very specific way, but I do agree that that's a really bad way to phrase it. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think I mean I'm fully like I said, we started this conversation with a white paper 4.5 years ago that really did bookend the conversation with fertility and menopause. And I think that's not the right way to view it. This is how I
Mhm.
think about it now. I think that um, it's more accurate and it also sort of stimulates your thinking in a different way to think about ovaries um, as the architects of health in female bodies. So ovaries are sitting at the center of a really complex signaling network, and I by no means want to simplify it or make it seem trivial. But I think it's fair to say that ovaries are signaling to almost every tissue in a woman's body. And there's a two-way chemical conversation going on between ovaries and every organ system listed here, and even more than this. And every one of those conversations is different. So it's important not to oversimplify things. But because we know so much about what happens when ovaries are either removed or when ovaries are not working properly, I think we can say with some certainty that what ovaries are doing is promoting health. And so while each one of those chemical conversations is distinct, unique, and complex, when ovaries aren't working properly at any age, that essentially uncovers risk for different health issues, whether that's a disease or a disorder. And so I think about focusing healthy aging in women through the lens of ovarian function. Another way to say this is that ovaries are the pacemaker for aging in female bodies. So rather than bookending the conversation with fertility and menopause, which is really, those are two very important aspects of female health that we do want to focus on, but we don't want to leave out the rest of it. Because when ovaries are not working properly in, preteens, that uncovers risk for things like irregular menstrual cycles or issues going through puberty. When they're not working properly in a woman in their 20s, that uncovers risk for things like PCOS or POI, sometimes even cancer. When they're not working properly in their 30s, that again is something that we know quite a bit about the downstream consequences. And we think about infertility and miscarriage being some of the things that are risky when your ovaries aren't working properly. Then in a woman in her 40s, that's, if ovaries aren't working properly, that uncovers risk for all of the things that we associate with perimenopause. And when they stop functioning the way they were before, I want to say they stop functioning entirely, but they stop functioning the way they were before at menopause and after menopause, that uncovers all of the risks that we think about, when we talk about menopause, which I think I have a slide coming up next on that. But it's important to say that, it's the continuum of health across a female life. And so I really am trying hard not to talk just about fertility and menopause. And I think it's a major misconception that ovaries are only important for those things. So yeah, here's this slide again. I think calling them the pacemaker for aging in female bodies really, and then acknowledging that they're aging faster than the rest of the tissues in a woman's body. I think if I was to sum up what I want to accomplish and what I want the consortium to accomplish, because it's not going to be one researcher, this is going to take an army of people to accomplish, is that we should try to sync up aging in ovaries with aging in the rest of the body, full stop. And immediately people will stop me and say, oh my God, we don't want to have women having babies when they're 70. And I think that's just like the conversation when you turn it towards end menopause. It's really a distraction. We're not talking about women having babies in their 70s. The fertility component of ovarian function and the endocrine function of ovaries are separable to some degree. But it also takes more than just functioning ovaries to carry a healthy offspring to term. And so, what we're talking about is preserving the endocrine function of ovaries in a way that maintains health in female bodies. Does that make sense? So that's how I think about it now. And I think the language we use is really important. And so I'm trying to get away from gendered language because it's harmful. Obviously, it reinforces a lot of ideas that like menstruation equals being a woman. And I think it's really important that we stop calling them reproductive organs. So one of the reasons that we rebranded from the GCRLE, or the Global Consortium for Reproductive Longevity and Equality, is that I think if we don't stop calling them reproductive organs, it continues to kind of like allow people to sort of think narrowly about women's health and healthy aging, and just to like funnel everything through the lens of fertility. And we have to make it broader than that. So ovaries are important for more than just reproduction. So we shouldn't call them reproductive organs. We should call them ovaries or fallopian tubes or uterus. Not to belabor the point. I'm not going to go through this, but these are all the things that obviously when ovaries are not working the way they were before at menopause, it uncovers risk for all of these different health issues, including cardiovascular disease, stroke, all the things that we've been hearing about for the last few years. But it doesn't cause disease directly in most cases. It's really about like increased risk because, all of these important signals are missing. Does that make sense to everybody? And does anybody disagree with me or have other sort of things to say about ovaries and aging?
No, absolutely. Thank you. Agree.
And I think, for me, we had the word equality in the name to begin with, and I thought that was really important because this does, the fact that ovaries are aging faster than the rest of the tissues in a woman's body does set up this inherent inequality. For many reasons that extend beyond just fertility. So there's an asymmetry there that I think is really important to solve. And we are talking about half the population here. I think you guys probably all know this, but there's a lot of interesting things we understand in a correlative way, but we don't know what's driving it. So older age at menopause correlates with increased longevity. We know that reproductive span is correlated with the woman's overall lifespan, but we don't understand what that relationship is or what's causal there. But what's interesting about that is that this extends to male brothers. And so there is a genetic component to ovarian aging that is going to be important, not just for women, but also for men. And, we already know that age at natural menopause, from lots of beautiful data sets that have come out in the last few years, that age at natural menopause, that you can explain somewhere between, depending on who you're talking to, 10 and I would say 20% of the age of natural menopause can be explained through genetics. So I think that's an important thing to mention if you're ever talking to an audience that has a lot of men in it. But if we come back to this ridiculously simple cartoon, these are the questions, right? Like what's driving ovaries to age faster? And that, from a nerdy research point of view is really a fascinating question that really transcends female biology. It's really a question about if we can understand what's causing ovaries to age faster than the rest of the body, then that will give us some clues about aging in other tissues. So there's, I think there's a lot of really interesting stuff that can come out of this work beyond extending a female health span. The other question is why it varies so much between individuals. So I don't know if you caught the x-axis on the few slides ago where we were talking about how reproductive span correlates with overall lifespan. But for menopause, age at natural menopause is considered normal if it spans like a 12-year window. And that's crazy. Perimenopause, the period before menopause, can last anywhere from 4 to 10 years on average. And there's nothing that's so variable at the level of the individual, no other signature in human health that's so variable. And I think if we could understand some of that variability, that would also give us a clue about what those underlying driving factors are. Why it happens at all, right? Human females are weird in the animal kingdom. And then why it happens, so early, I think are the other basic questions that we're hoping to solve. And that's the goal. And I would also say that we're so far behind in our knowledge that we don't know where to look. And so, whether it's one signal or many signals or some, combination of signals across time that's driving this, we don't know where to look. And so that means that research across the lifespan is fair game here. So I won't belabor the point, but these are the kinds of questions that we want to have answered. And I don't think I need to explain to this audience why we're here, right? There's, I would say, three major things that have put us in this horrible position, where I think we have primitive knowledge of the female body. Societal taboos around talking about female bodies, which I think are largely being shattered over the last 5 to 10 years. Funding in both the private and the public sector is paltry. And then this bias in biomedical research and in clinical research towards male bodies. So all of those things have put us in this position where we really don't know the most basic things about how female bodies work. And we certainly don't understand why ovaries are aging faster than the rest of the women's body. So I mentioned earlier that we put a strong focus on this at Buck a few years ago. So we launched the first center in the world to focus on reproductive aging as a lens through which to understand aging in the rest of the body. And it has an intramural component at the Buck Institute, which is the center. And then the external global arm of that is our global consortium. And these are the kinds of things we do. So the biggest thing we do is we fund science. But then we also, since we're building this field from the beginning, we create resources to try to move the science faster. And so we do things that maybe aren't so normal for a granting initiative. We spend a lot more time in touch with our grantees. And initially, they were really, I would say, I don't know, uncomfortable with that until they realized that the reason we want to be in touch with them is so that we can help them if they hit a wall or if they encounter something that's, a barrier to progress for their work to move forward, that we can actually help them get past that. We're also really interested in helping them translate things faster. And so we put together a lot of resources. I have them listed on another slide, so I'll get there in a second. But building a global infrastructure, bringing everyone who has an interest in the space into the same conversation, right? We need not just a creative army of scientists and clinicians to work on this. We also need people in biotech and pharma. We need funders. We need policymakers to change some of the to push some of the money, both publicly and privately, towards solving these issues. And then, let's see. So this is the center, probably not super important to go through all the details here, but it's made up of faculty who are resident at the Buck, like me and Eric, but then also faculty who are in other places. And we curated this list of people specifically because they have really unique expertise and really unique models or technology that we think is really important. And so the pandemic taught us that we don't all have to be in the same place to really achieve something important. And so we work together as like a translational collaborative hub to work on those questions that were on the slide before this. But as I said, we've changed our name. So the global consortium is called productivehealth.org now. And here's a list of the things that we've been doing. So grants for sure, advocacy. The things that you might be most interested in are that we started an annual conference. So we just had our 3rd meeting, and next year it will be here in the Bay Area in May. We haven't yet set the dates, but we will very soon. And we welcome people. We try to make that conference really unique try to bring in elements that you wouldn't get otherwise, and that are, really, I think, good uses of people's time. I'm not a huge fan of the scientific conferences where you just sit in a conference room all day long and listen to talks. I think that's important, and we do some of that, but then we also do other things. And our goal is, with all of this, is to get people to share ideas, to collaborate in different ways, to kind of force dialogue between groups that don't normally talk to each other. So that might mean doctors and scientists, that might mean, industry and academic people. And the goal is to go beyond traditional models so that we can really accelerate progress as much as possible. And if you have questions about any of that. So the grants, you can read about this. We've funded so far 14.5 million to 49 scientists all over the world. We're trying to support projects that are really risk-taking and that are blue sky, that as much as we can, that cover that entire space of potential discovery landscape for solving these issues. And then I think we've been pretty successful in our initiatives. We've been going for 4 years. We started in the middle of the pandemic, and these are just looking at citations. But these numbers are going up, and you can see this dot, the last dot is this year. And so I expect it to be hitting some kind of a non-linear path here, which is pretty cool. And we've already had, and to be clear, we're not measuring progress in papers published, but I think this is a way to see, the kind of impact that we've had so far. The way we're measuring progress is how fast can we get to something that would be a true intervention or a therapeutic. This is the Reproductive Aging conference I told you about. We have a website, and we'll advertise it when we finally settle on a date. I don't know what slides are coming up next. Well, we've been doing a large media campaign, and I think we've had pretty good success getting the wider world to start talking about women's health and to start talking about things like menopause and female bodies. We spend a lot of time doing advocacy and working with different organizations and initiatives. So for example, we worked with the Gates Foundation and the NIH on the Innovation Equity Forum for this Innovation Opportunity Map. We work with the Women's Midlife Health Policy Institute to try to make changes in the med school curriculum, and for REIs, like you, Anastasia. I don't know if that's how you pronounce your name, but I'm reading it off the Zoom. But for REIs to have more information about how to take care of women in midlife and beyond, because there isn't a single place in the med school curriculum or even in REI training really that focuses on how to take care of healthy women who aren't either pregnant or having some sort of health crisis. And then we spent a lot of time actually working with the UK government, because they're a little bit ahead of us with respect to the government putting initiatives together around women's health. And I can talk about this more if you're interested, but there's lots of things going on there. Okay, that's all my slides. I'm going to stop sharing, and then hopefully we'll get to conversation instead of me just talking at you.
Sounds good. All right. So thanks for presenting, and I guess I'll just open it up first for anybody who wants to ask anything that's on their mind. I saw Emily joined, so that's good.
Yeah, I have a question actually. So a lot of clinical studies right now define menopause as the clinical mark of the end of ovarian function. I know you mentioned that that's not something that you want to kind of frame this conversation around. Do you think that that's still how it's defined, or are we kind of redefining menopause or the end of ovarian function, or
well, menopause is defined clinically as a single day in a woman's life. Right? Menopause is the day on which a woman has not had a menstrual period for 12 months. Full stop. That's it. So it's a single day. Everything before that is perimenopause. Everything after that is postmenopause. And so I think people really confuse menopause with postmenopause. So what they're really talking about is the period of time after menopause or the period of time before menopause, depending on who you're talking to. So I think the definition is clear. We just need to be more clear about how we use those words. And for me, I think menopause marks many things. It certainly marks the end of menstruation and the end of fertility. It also marks a dramatic decline in ovarian endocrine function. Perimenopause, on the other hand, I would say marks a period of time of fluctuation in ovarian function. So, and both endocrine function and with respect to fertility. And so that's why perimenopause is there's so many symptoms that manifest from perimenopause because, if you believe what I told you about ovaries sitting at the center of a signaling network that's basically talking to every tissue in a woman's body, the number of chemical signaling molecules that ovaries are producing and using is probably in the dozens at least. And we talk about 3 of them. And sometimes we broaden that conversation to include like 8 or 9 of them if we're talking about the menstrual cycle and fertility. But really, I would say the lexicon, all of the words in those chemical conversations, we don't even know what they are. But what's clear is that when ovaries stop or change the way that they're functioning with respect to like that endocrine side of things, that a lot of that uncovers risk for a lot of different health issues. But we know that ovaries are doing something still after menopause, because for postmenopausal women, if you remove their ovaries, so these are women who, from the perspective of the medical community, shouldn't need their ovaries anymore, right? Because endocrine functions pretty much declined, at least as far as we can measure things like estrogen and progesterone. And, the fertility function is also gone. But if you remove ovaries from postmenopausal women, those women have poorer health outcomes than postmenopausal women who retain their ovaries. So we know they're doing something, we don't know what. And that's, again, an area of active research. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So for me, again, it's really just thinking about aging in ovaries and menopause, postmenopause, premenopause. These are periods of time where, we know pretty well, not super well, but we know pretty well, what the downstream consequences of those either fluctuations or changes in ovarian function are. But we don't know what's driving them. And it's that causal stuff that matters. If what we're going to do is provide women like a menu of options that would allow them to extend ovarian function in a way that would preserve their health span with age, then that's where we need to focus. And I don't want anyone to think that I'm talking about preserving the fertility function of ovaries. I think that would be a much harder thing to do. And I'm not saying it's impossible, but our focus is really around trying to preserve healthy aging in women. And I don't think that I think you talked a little bit about hormone therapy, Anastasia. Hormone therapy is by far the best Band-Aid we have for postmenopausal and even perimenopausal women. But it's a really imperfect and it's not an ideal solution. It's really a Band-Aid. And I think of everything that we have right now for women's health, everything as a Band-Aid, because none of it is really addressing the underlying causal factors. Part of that is because we're in this, this ridiculous primitive state where we don't understand the first thing about how female bodies work. Right. So we don't know how to diagnose anything. We don't know what causes anything. We don't know. We're just like in the dark ages. But part of it is really, that the focus has been on woman as incubator. Right. And so if that's the focus, then healthy aging doesn't even factor in there. And I don't imagine that what we're going to find is some silver bullet cure. What I imagine is that we will understand how ovaries work at baseline, like how they work at every age, with enough resolution that we should be able to look at any woman at any age and say, okay, you as an individual, you have, your genetic background and you have your environmental exposures, and we know what your age is. And so here's a menu of things that you could do that would be appropriate for someone your age with your individual risk factors and background. Here's a bunch of things you could do that, we know should help to extend your ovarian function later in life if you're in your 20s. But that menu of things that we might offer to someone in her 20s would be completely different than you would offer to someone like me in my 40s. And similarly, that for someone who's 80, doesn't have her ovaries anymore, for example, or, never took hormone therapy, that you would have a menu of things that would be different, but that would be hopefully able to provide some sort of extension of health span by either preserving or mimicking some aspect of ovarian function that's important for healthy aging. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I can add a lot of from a clinician perspective. What is about actually, yes, hormone replacement therapy, it was and it's still, but at some point is the best tool like we have, but it's not ideal, completely not ideal. I have a lot of actually question about it still. Even we came to bioidentical hormone replacement therapy, it was best solution, which we find out. But yeah, it's a still, like, for example, from my perspective as a clinician, I was working a lot with the perimenopause period, I can say. And the best what I found that time, like I was start to work a lot with peptides actually, and more ovarian peptides. And this is a little bit, I believe, could delay the menopause, because I saw it not only working with the symptoms, it's also, I think at some point should be more clinical study. I was working a lot with Garrison peptides, if you know, it's Russian, it's epitalon, it's Genolutan, it's most like a famous two, I think, about related to aging, ovarian aging. And yeah, but Professor Garrison, I would love to ask you one thing, which is currently a little bit on the table. It's all related to adipocyte tissue and PRP injection in the ovarian. I know it's a lot of like controversial data right now about this, right? And especially I'm interested in mesenchymal stem cells therapy. And maybe you can add something about this. I will really appreciate it, your opinion.
Yeah, so I think for me, PRP, PRP is interesting, right? Because there are some clinical trials, not in ovarian aging, but in, for example, like osteoarthritis and like sports medicine. There are some clinical trials that seem both repeatable and seem to show some positive impact. For me, the problem is that there's so little data, and what is clear is that there's some real issue with the kits that people use to isolate PRP, right? What you get out of any particular kit, even the same kit, is kind of like it's not well defined, and it's incredibly variable. So for me, it's a little bit too, at this moment, that's not to say that we shouldn't do a better job of, finding ways to isolate it that are more robust and repeatable. So robust, repeatable ways to isolate whatever it is that we're calling PRP, much bigger and more carefully controlled clinical studies, I think, are important. And then we'll see, right? The thing is, it's just like, it's a bunch of growth factors and random crap. And so I'm sure sometimes there's beneficial stuff in there,
Yeah.
but what is that? And can we, so I feel like it's again, like kind of in the dark ages. And I do, I'm a big fan of data. So that's where I sit with the PRP and that kind of stuff.
For there was a company that was doing PRP, and one of their big hooks was that someone who was postmenopausal, or a few people who were postmenopausal, gave birth. Then I asked you this, I think, and you said that it was actually it kind of just happens naturally, randomly. Could you
Well,
kind of elaborate?
I would say that towards the end of reproductive span, you know, ovarian function fluctuates.
Yeah.
It doesn't just, that cartoon graph I showed, the reason I show it and say that it's misleading is because it's an average, right? And so at the level of an individual, fertility especially is stochastic. And so young, healthy women can go through periods of unexplained infertility. Older women can go through periods of hyperfertility, especially during perimenopause and around menopause. And we don't understand that. But what we do know is that, there are, people call them miracle babies, but there are a large number of women in their 50s who have babies uh,
Could we
without doing any kind of special anything. Maybe we have at least one physician on the line, so maybe she can speak to this a little bit more than I can. But they're not miracle babies. It's just that ovarian function fluctuates dramatically during that period of time, and definitely periods of hyperfertility happen. Totally unexplained. I
Yeah,
don't know why that. I mean, I don't know if you have any insight.
that's true. It's totally unexplained, but also when we do in vitro fertilization, for example, with a very low anti-Müller factor, right? It's sometimes after a lot of naturals, pregnancy happened. This is also about how with something change, with access probably too. This for me is more important, like for near ovarian access, how it would work, regarding to menopause and fertility as well.
Yeah, when people ask me, I mean, I think about ovarian function. I think about female physiology in general, just that every part of the system is connected. And we really have to think about female bodies as like a functioning whole, and that you need to optimize every part of the system for it to work properly. And that it goes for ovaries as well. And we definitely know that there's a strong relationship, although we don't understand, again, the direction or what's driving it. But ovaries, like ovarian function and metabolic function, are really, really closely aligned. And so, I mean, I feel like sometimes friends, who are having fertility issues will make relatively simple lifestyle changes and then suddenly get pregnant. And that's not to say that that's an answer for everybody who's going through infertility. There are real and serious reasons why people have infertility, but I do think that when people ask me like what do I recommend, and I don't recommend anything because I'm not a doctor, but I can tell you what the data says, and it's just that everything that we know that impacts aging in the rest of the body also impacts aging in ovaries. And so diet, exercise, muscle, all those things we don't want to think about. Those are the best, those are the gold standard right now. But yeah, the link between metabolic function and ovarian function is really interesting. And we know that like young women, for example, who have underlying dysfunction in their ovaries, like women who have PCOS, are more likely to have metabolic disease later in life. And that propensity to develop metabolic disease with age is hereditary, and they can pass it on to their male offspring. And so, there's lots to discover here.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's a lot of now speaking about Ozempic babies, which make me crazy about this topic, but it's still like really a hot topic around. Yeah.
I wanted to show something really quickly here. It's some biomarker, a complaint, I guess. So this is hopefully everyone can see this. This is the program that we're working on to display biomarker data. And here we have anti-Müllerian hormone, and this is from the CDC. This is from an NHANES data group. You can see that it's slowly declining with age. And what's interesting is that once I filter for female, the data goes away, because what NHANES did was between 1999 and 2003, they measured male anti-Müllerian hormone only, and there's zero info. Yeah, no, yeah, exactly, right? Like, I'm looking at this, I'm just like, why? First of all, why? And then second of all, like, so so this is what's going on, and I'm like, okay, well, can we see, because I've never heard AMH spoken about in the context of male health, but obviously something's happening here. It's kind of interesting. First of all, that it's even
Wait, between 1993 and when? I have to write this
this
down.
is 1999 and
Oh,
2003. This is the data set. They measured it for 3 cohorts, and then they just stopped. I don't know. There's no other years that they measured this, and it's annoying. So yeah, so it would be nice to have like scatter plots where you could really see what's happening for not just AMH, but we've got sex steroids here for like follicle stimulating hormone. Here's the data. They measured the transition period, but nothing on like either side. Like all these data sets are just incomplete.
well, the other thing, so this is really beautiful the way you have this set up. I would say two things. One about the AMH measurements in males is that, the idea that testosterone, for example, is a male hormone and that's not important in females is just like ludicrous.
Right.
All of these hormones, just because they have sex-specific differences in their function, doesn't mean that they're not important for both males and females. The other thing is that these are incredibly complex signaling networks, right? And so FSH, for example, that you showed there, like it depends if you're measuring it in a female, it depends what time of day you measure it, what day of the cycle it is. It so many things, and what FSH are you measuring? FSH comes in many glycoforms. There's two different, I mean, there's
Okay.
lots. And so those kinds of questions, for especially for anything related to sex hormones, those are really important things to think about too. And for a lot of these retrospective studies, you're not going to get that level of information, and so you might only get this zoomed out picture.
Right.
But for anything that's prospective or going forward, it's really, I think it's important to be thoughtful about how you collect the data and what you're collecting. Otherwise, it's just noise, and I think that's been part of the issue.
Yeah. So my question, I guess, is what other organizations are collecting data on these types of things that you know of? Like that they're doing the actual data collection. I could try to go contact them, try to get a scatter plot that looks like this, and then pull it into this
Well,
system.
I mean, the Women's Health Initiative is still ongoing. That data exists. You have to be approved, you have to apply to, but then there's also, I mean, the NHS collects this kind of data, um, in some form. There's a lot of large scale databases that exist. And again, each one has its own unique caveats and things like that, especially for this retrospective data. But there's a lot of large scale databases out there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. And
Sorry
then
for the noise.
the idea is if we put that in and we put other pieces in, like if we put in metabolic stuff that's tied to like the same, like if you take one person, you measure their hormonal health as well as other metabolic stuff, you'll be able to see trends and like differentiate between like how those things are affecting each other very easily. And then you can put your own data into the system and you'll be able to track like what should be happening to you at whatever stage. So that's what we're working on.
That's a great aspirational goal.
I think
I would love
it's
to have that.
okay. Um, one other question that I had, does anybody else have anything to say right now? Or, okay. I had another question, which is, I'd like to know what anybody in the call have heard that either delays or speeds up menopause. Anastasia talked about peptides. I was gonna try to pose it as an open question, just like anything that you've heard of, even like as a rumor or hearsay. What have you heard that actually affects it? or everyone speak up at once. I'll give out some examples. One is like obesity or smoking. But when I go to these places and try to find out like the details, it's just that they say, oh, it kind of like speeds it up or it slows it down. They don't give an amplitude. They don't say by like how much, or there's no like pool of data behind it. It's just like somebody heard it from somebody else, and then they're like, yeah, this is probably, the case.
I think you can probably find data if you're interested in looking at the data. I think you can find data from fertility clinics and from fertility studies that look at BMI and things like smoking, because
Okay.
I'm pretty sure that data is out there, but it would come from fertility studies, right? So it would come from people who are interested in fertility.
Okay. All right. So we're at the end of the hour, but this is pretty casual. I don't know how much time you have, Jennifer, if you're
I need to get going.
okay. That's all right. Okay,
Yeah.
so that's fine. Any last questions before she has to leave? And all right. Well, thanks for your time and thanks for joining us. For
Yeah, nice to meet you all.
and we'll see you.
Feel free. We want you to be part of our network, so feel free to reach out and yeah.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for organizing, Erin.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, no problem. All right.
Okay.
Thanks everybody for
Bye.
stopping by. See you guys later.